What if your campaign world didn't belong to just your gaming group, but instead was a living world with multiple groups all playing in the same narrative setting and their actions impacting events in the games occurring at other tables? One group assassinates a noble, a second group gets pulled into the war that explodes as a result, and a third group was working directly for that noble and now must hunt down the killers. One interconnected story, written by the actions of players at multiple tables, all canon within the same narrative world. This video is about how I see this working using free tools. I believe this could fundamentally change the way we think about TTRPGs in general and how we approach the idea of campaign worlds. Hi, I'm Travis. I'm one of the developers of the new science fantasy TTRPG Altered World, the game that finally lets you answer the question, what is the maximum amount of rules as written chaos I can inject into my Game Master's campaign world without giving them an aneurysm, making them rage quit, or both? So, living campaigns aren't really anything new. The first version of this idea started in the mid-1980s and persisted until around 2003. There have been lots of living campaign efforts since then, but almost all of them share a significant structural feature. They're centrally managed, highly episodic, and often convention-based with rotating characters and GMs. That's not what this idea is about. Instead, I'm suggesting a distributed campaign world with multiple parties playing within it and a synchronized game canon. This distinction becomes possible because the previous attempts were all limited by the technology of the day. Snail mail, periodical publications, and the like forced a slow, one-way directional flow of campaign information. Now that cloud drives and web-based collaborative tools are the norm, we have the possibility to make this more than it ever could have been before. So here's the structural premise. This is a small-scale concept, no more than 10 tables, but the optimal number is probably between 3 and 5. Any more than that, and the canon synchronization gets to be too much work. All the parties involved agree that they are playing within the same specific instance of a game world. This doesn't have to be an officially published campaign setting, but the more existing lore that game masters can pull from, the better. This could be run in a robustly built homebrew world, but that has its own set of risks that we will talk about later on in the video. The specifics of the setting will have a lot to do with the level to which PC's actions interact. Several groups playing as members of different factions within the confines of the city of Waterdeep will feel very different to groups playing on opposite sides of the border between Cormyr and Amn. Too small of a narrative scale may stretch the believability of the campaign. If the games all take place within a single district, there's lots of opportunity for the party's stories to interact, but it may raise questions of why so much is happening in just one district. Too large of a scale, and you end up with the interaction only being through rumors and things like that. The sweet spot will sit somewhere in the middle, with actions from one table driving story beats at another. So, how does this work with infrastructure? This gets to the how. The specific tools needed to make this happen are neither new nor costly. I'm just not aware of anyone using them this way. There are two main options, although I'm sure you can run with this idea and come up with all kinds of other approaches. So option A is a more centralized approach. All games will utilize the same chat or voice chat server, something like Discord or one of its competitors. The games could be run there, but what's more important is that there is a channel where the game masters of each table can post the major events of each session after it is played without the players being able to access it. A channel to track the status of various factions and major NPCs in the setting would also be really helpful. So option B is less centralized. Instead of all groups relying on the same Discord server, they could use a shared note-taking tool like Obsidian or Notion. We're big fans of Obsidian specifically, and an interesting aspect of using it is that you can store your vault on the cloud drive. With a vault in a shared cloud folder, all game masters could access the canon of the world and make the same notations we just talked about. What an option like this does for you is make interrelating information within the canon a little easier, because you can connect notes and tag factions, NPCs, or locations to make finding their status take less time. The two core elements of both systems create an operational loop. Every play session creates canon, and every game master reads the canon relevant to their storyline when they prep their session. So let's look at that loop in a little more detail. So Table A has their regular session. Afterward, the game master goes into the tracking tool, posts information about any major NPC deaths, political shifts, events of wars or catastrophes that occurred within the session. On a smaller scale, setting like a single city, the outcomes of specific encounters might also matter. Then, as the other game masters prep for their sessions, they review the other game masters' updates and assess those events for how they impact factions, geography, economy, and rumor networks within their campaign. Not every detail is going to matter, and exactly what needs to be documented will depend on the scale of the shared setting. You can think of this as a tiered canon structure. There are local, regional, and global impacting events, and you need to document the ones that matter to the specific elements of the setting in use. Here's where things get exciting. Each gaming table can align their party with a different faction in a larger narrative structure. Imagine a setting with a ruthless despot in power and an emerging rebellion against their rule. Perhaps Table A are loyalists that back the crown because they believe that a strong hand is needed to keep external threats at bay. But Table B allies themselves with the fledgling rebellion because of their concern for the welfare of the common folk that suffer under the despot's oppressive rule. Table C, meanwhile, supports a merchant syndicate hoping to exploit the chaos and line their pockets. Now you have three parties with intersecting and conflicting goals, all within the same game world. The structure is one of the best for great storytelling in general, but how much better could it be when each side of the conflict is now controlled by the players at the various tables, rather than a single GM? The rebel table captures a frontier fortress to use as a base of operations. The loyalists are dispatched to reclaim it, and the merchants either step in as a potential mediator or simply hover like vultures to pick the carcasses clean. This is the area where things get the most complicated, but can also feel the most magical. Coordinated cross-table events. This could look something like an inter-table play-by post to simulate some kind of a diplomatic summit, or you could end up with coordinated joint play sessions. For two tables aligned to friendly factions, they could come together to face foes that might otherwise be beyond the reach of their individual parties. Or, and here's where we get controversial, they could face each other in direct PvP combat sessions. PvP play gets a bad rap, and not without reason. Introducing that kind of conflict within a gaming group is almost always toxic. But for some players, the unpredictability of facing another group of PCs may be the most exciting gameplay there is. The fact that the conflict is with an external party could also go a long way to eliminating the negative aspects that go along with most PvP experiences. We're not trying to gloss over this, though. It requires mature players, an enthusiastic buy-in across the board, and a coordinated effort to align expectations on house rules ahead of time. Here's why I think this could be revolutionary at the gaming table. Emergent world building. So the narrative arc of play will develop a depth and complexity that would be very difficult for a single game master to craft, simply because you have more hands writing the story. Player investment. In general, the more that players believe their actions matter within the game world, the more they invest in their character. Knowing that their actions will ripple into the gameplay experience of other players running through other adventures will make the world and the PCs feel truly alive. Factional depth. Groups in the game world take on a new meaning when they are driven specifically by player agency, and that interplay between factions will elevate the value of the interactions of faction goals. Reduced Game Master burnout. You've got a shared creative load. The Game Master has a reduced cognitive burden because once the game starts moving, it essentially writes itself. In fact, forever GMs may get an opportunity to feel some of that experience of being a player again, since not even they will be able to predict where the story's going to go. And lastly, this creates a sense of a living history. The campaign setting becomes more layered and dynamic in a way that simply reading the lore from a campaign book will never meet. It's not all roses, though. If this is not done with care, it could fall apart. The first problem that we could encounter is canon overload. If game masters include too much information in their posts, they could end up with an unwieldy volume of data to work through as they do their prep. Along this line, using a homebrew setting would require a setting that is robustly documented enough to be useful to all game masters. But the creative game master, the one that created the world, would have to be willing to allow other game masters to build within their sandbox. This is not going to work if you have worries about narrative ownership. So tonal drift. Game masters and tables all need to be fairly aligned in tone. If one GM or a table decides to take their game in a direction that doesn't work well for the other tables, you could end up with a significant mismatch. There are play genres that may simply be incompatible. For example, if one table wants to drift into a darker, more horror-aligned tone, and the other becomes more lighthearted and campy, it may break the immersion for the players to have those events become canon within their game. There's the possibility of power imbalance. This is primarily a concern if there's a desire to have inter-party combat, but even in a non-confrontational style, it could cause difficulty. If one party advances significantly faster than the others, it could introduce threats into the story that aren't appropriate for the other table's power levels. The next point could also drive this as well. Scheduling chaos. There will likely need to be some coordination between the scheduled playtimes of all involved tables to avoid having canon that cannot be included in time for the next session. Even simple play frequency mismatches can cause significant difficulties. If one group plays weekly but the next plays bi-weekly or even monthly, the less frequently playing group may struggle to be able to incorporate events in a way that makes sense within the timeline. This gets even more complex if you desire to include cross-table play events. We all know that the big of TTRPGs is the calendar. So the best way to manage these risks is basically to design them out structurally to the greatest extent possible. Here are a few things that we think would go a long way to ensure that play goes well. The first, develop templates or forms that game masters can use to document canonical events from their play sessions. Using a standardized method helps prevent events from being missed, either on the documentation side or on the review side of the operational loop. A dashboard interface, something maybe even as simple as a spreadsheet that consolidates the statuses of all factions in play in the setting, would be really helpful. And including a flag to notify GMs which factions have had changes since their last review would also help reduce the time effort put into session prep. A community tone agreement and mutual player safety standards. Make sure everybody has a common set of shared expectations. This becomes even more critical here than it does at single table play. This may be a little less critical, but a common understanding of homebrew rules and rulings is still important. Not every table needs to play by the same rules, or maybe even not even the same system, unless you want to coordinate direct cross-table play. I can imagine this actually working with one table playing Shadowdark, one playing some variant of 5e, and one playing with something like our game, Altered World. Unless and until you plan to have direct, live, cross-table interaction, you don't all have to have the same rules, but it is worthwhile that each table understands the rules that each other table is playing by. You simply have to put a cap on table count. What that cap needs to be is likely something each collective will need to determine on their own, but each will have a limit that needs to be set. Otherwise, the canon will outpace the individual game master's ability to keep up with. We recommend starting with 2 tables and working up from there to the maximum level you're comfortable with, probably less than 10. Consider instituting a freeze on canon-affecting events prior to any crossovers. If desired, a direct narrative coordination between game masters could occur at something of a World Council meeting as frequently as needed to tie events together. So, as a player or a game master, here's what you get out of this. So, instead of linear consequences and causality, you end up with more of a cascade or ripple effect. This becomes more pronounced as you add additional tables into the same world and as the PCs get closer together geographically. And this will help your setting feel more like a living, breathing world. The other major benefit is that you move from having a single narrative arc to that of emergent storytelling. It's the same thing that happens when PCs act off of NPC actions when those NPCs are run by the game master, but this just turns it up to 11. So who is this likely to work best for? We think close gaming communities or groups that have multiple capable and willing game masters within them would probably be a good fit. You could do this on a professional site like RPG Club or Start Playing Games as well. Games and campaign settings that support the idea of players aligning themselves with published NPC factions are particularly well suited for this. You're also probably going to want long-term players rather than drop in or drop out, although I wouldn't want to discount the idea of trying this with a West Marches style campaign. If your group really struggles with the scheduling beast, this may not be for you unless you're very flexible in how you approach it. The only thing I can think of that would approach a true hard no would be game masters that run purely improv. If the game master isn't willing to at least review the canon and accept it as binding on the game world, this won't work. Similarly, game masters that exclusively run large campaign modules may struggle with this format as well. So imagine multiple tables, all aligned with various factions on different sides of an epic war. There's no pre-written outcome, and you get all of this without the pressure on any one game master to come up with everything. The game world evolves naturally without one single author. Would you like to play this way? If you're a GM, would you run a game in this framework? What else would you want to add to this to ensure success? Thanks so much for watching our video. If you think this is a good idea, then there's a possibility you would like our approach to gaming in general. Feel free to check out some of our other videos and see what you think. If you really like the cut of our jib, consider subscribing to the channel and take a look at the free Quick Start, our new TTRPG, The Altered World Beer and Pretzels Kit. You can pick it up over on DriveThruRPG at the link down in the description. Until next time, keep your world altered.